Master this rule, and no one will be able to control you. Look at your hands, at your telephone, at the walls of the room in which you are located. Do you feel safe? This is your first and most fatal mistake. In a world where information is currency and attention is fuel, you are nothing more than a biological asset, a resource. If you do not control your reactions, someone else controls them. Your empathy is a backdoor in your operating system. Your need for approval is a leash pulled by anyone who knows the basics of ethology. I am not here to comfort you. I am here to dissect your weakness. We will go through 5 stages of power awareness. I will show you how social predators hack the human psyche, and I will teach you a rule that will make you unreachable. Welcome to the real world. There is no morality here. There are only predators and those who allow themselves to be eaten. Chapter 1. The effect of imaginary safety. Why your politeness is your downfall 1. Phase Encounter. Narrative. The sky outside the windows of the Sterling & Partners office was the color of wet concrete. In the office on the 40th floor, there was such a thick smell of expensive leather and antiseptic that it felt as if you were in an operating room rather than an office. Mark sat on the very edge of a low, intentionally uncomfortable visitor's chair. Opposite him, in a massive throne-like chair, sat Mr. Sterling. Sterling did not scream. He did not stomp his feet. He simply remained silent. 4 minutes had already passed. The silence pressed against Mark's eardrums. He heard his own heartbeat, ragged and panicked. Sterling slowly, almost hypnotically, moved a paperclip from one pile to another. His movements were calculated, like those of a surgeon. He did not look at Mark, but Mark felt his presence upon him like a heavy slab. "Mark," Sterling finally spoke. The voice was quiet, devoid of any intonation. "Your report on the merger, it is accurate." He paused, intentionally dragging out the word accurate until it began to sound like an insult. Mark felt cold sweat running down his back. His brain began to feverishly generate excuses. "Mr. Sterling, I simply wanted to ensure that all the legal subtleties—" "Please, do not be silent. Tell me that I did not mess up." "Subtleties." Sterling finally looked up. His eyes were empty, like surveillance camera lenses. "You spent 40 pages on subtleties, but you were afraid to make a decision. You hid behind numbers because you are afraid of responsibility." Mark opened his mouth to object, but Sterling simply raised one eyebrow. This barely noticeable gesture, a movement of a couple of millimeters, forced Mark to fall silent. Silence filled the room again. 2. Phase Psychological X-ray. Analysis. Let us analyze what just happened to Mark. Sterling is a predator, and he uses an information vacuum. When a person encounters silence from an authority figure, their brain perceives it as a threat to survival. In prehistoric times, the silence of the pack leader meant exile, and exile meant death. Neurochemistry. At this moment, Mark's adrenal glands release cortisol, the stress hormone. His pulse quickens, and blood flows away from the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic, toward the muscles. Mark's brain enters fight or flight mode, but there is nowhere to run, and he does not dare to fight. He freezes. Attack mechanism. Sterling uses Mark's accuracy as a hook. He knows that Mark is a good guy. Good guys fear conflicts and crave approval. By calling the report accurate, Sterling strikes at the ego. He makes Mark feel like a small child who brought a drawing to a parent, only for them to nod dryly. This is called status suppression through a feedback deficit. The less information the aggressor provides, the more the victim winds themselves up. 3. Phase psychological precedent. Real example. Let us recall the classic experiment by Solomon Asch, 1951, on social conformity. The subject was placed in a group of people who were decoys. They were shown 2 cards. On one was a single line, and on the other were 3 lines of different lengths. They had to say which of the 3 lines matched the length of the first one. The task was elementary. But when all the decoy participants began to call out an obviously incorrect option in unison, 75% of ordinary people agreed with them at least once. Why? Because the fear of being a black sheep, the fear of going against the group or authority, paralyzes vision and logic. Mark is in the same position now. Sterling has created an atmosphere where his opinion is the only truth, and Mark is ready to betray his own facts in the report just to regain the favor of the alpha. 4. Phase counterstrike. The lesson. Mark's inner voice screamed, "Apologize. Say that you will redo it. Ask what exactly he does not like." This is the reaction of a victim. This is an attempt to fill the silence with one's weakness. But this time, Mark remembered the rule. He forced himself not to look away. He felt the back of the chair pressing against his spine and intentionally relaxed his shoulders. He did not make excuses. "Mr. Sterling," Mark's voice sounded firmer than he expected. "If you believe that the report lacks aggressiveness in its decisions, I am ready to add a section with radical scenarios. But the figures remain the same. They are the foundation. I am not apologizing for my work. I am offering a tool, but I am not giving away my value." Sterling froze. The paperclip in his fingers stopped. For the first time during the entire meeting, he saw not a resource before him, but a person who has boundaries. Lesson number 1. Your need for approval is a leash. As soon as you stop waiting for praise, you become uncontrollable. Never fill silence with excuses. The one who makes excuses is already guilty. 5. Phase sensory immersion. The air in the office seemed to cool by a few more degrees. Mark looked at Sterling, and his vision became tunneled. He saw only the fine mesh of wrinkles around the boss's eyes and dust motes floating in the cold light of the lamps. The ticking of the expensive clock on the wall no longer seemed like hammer blows. Now it was just a sound. Mark realized Sterling's power rested on his own fear. As soon as the fear disappeared, the massive desk and leather chair turned into ordinary furniture. We are moving to the second stage of your deconstruction. If the first chapter taught you how to take a hit under conditions of open pressure, then the second chapter will reveal a more subtle and dangerous mechanism. We will talk about how you are turned into an addict, craving approval, without even using physical force. Listen carefully. Your emotions are a chemical code, and if someone has found the keys to it, you become a slave. If you recognized yourself or your past reactions in the described patterns or character behavior, place a plus sign in the comments. This is not a sign of weakness, but the first signal that your brain has begun the process of deconstructing old habits. Chapter 2. The Fog of Uncertainty and the Dopamine Loop 1. Phase Encounter. Narrative. Sarah looked at the screen of her smartphone so intensely that it seemed to her she could make it light up by the power of thought. 3 days of silence. 3 days during which Julian simply disappeared. Before this, everything was perfect. The honeymoon of their relationship. Flowers, messages at 3 o'clock in the morning, endless conversations about the future. Julian enveloped her with attention, creating the illusion that she was the center of his universe. And then, a sharp break. A vacuum. When the phone finally vibrated, Sarah almost dropped it. Her heart leapt to her very throat. "Hello?" Her voice sounded too thin, too exposed. "Hi, Sally. Look, I was up to my neck in work. I am checking how tightly the collar is fastened." "In work? You could not write a single word for 3 days?" "I was worried sick." Sarah felt how anger mixed with relief, turning into a toxic cocktail. "Sally, do not start this drama club." Julian's voice was cold and detached, as if he were talking to an annoying insurance agent. "If you are going to make scenes over every one of my work rushes, it will be very difficult for us to communicate." Sarah fell silent. Anger was instantly replaced by a sense of guilt. "Maybe I really am too demanding?" flashed through her head. 2. Phase Psychological X-ray Analysis. Julian is a master of psychological terror. He uses intermittent reinforcement in combination with gaslighting. Attack mechanism. First, he hooked Sarah on a high level of attention, dopamine bombardment. Then he abruptly deprived her of this resource. A real withdrawal syndrome is occurring in Sarah's brain right now. When he finally called, she received a dose, but instead of comfort, he delivered a blow. He devalued her feelings by calling them a drama club. Gaslighting. This is a form of mental abuse in which the victim is forced to doubt the adequacy of their perception of reality. Julian portrays her natural reaction to his disappearance as mental instability. Neurochemistry. During the moment of waiting, Sarah's cortisol was skyrocketing. Now, after the call, a sharp release of dopamine has occurred, but it is mixed with adrenaline. Sarah's brain is now fixated on one task: to return to that state of safety that existed at the beginning. She is ready for any concessions just to make this cycle of pain stop. 3. Phase Psychological Precedent. Real example. Let us turn to biology. Burris Frederick Skinner, one of the pillars of behaviorism, conducted experiments with rats in special boxes. In the first version, the rat pressed a lever and always received food. It ate when it was hungry and calmed down. In the second version, food was dispensed randomly. It pressed once, nothing. Again, nothing. On the 5th time, a mountain of food. The result was frightening. The rats from the second group became obsessed. They pressed the lever until total exhaustion, ignoring sleep, grooming, and other rats. The unpredictability of the reward caused the strongest addiction known to science. Sarah is Skinner's rat right now. Julian is her lever, and she will press it until she destroys her personality. 4. Phase Counterstrike. The lesson. Sarah's internal monologue at this moment is a battlefield. If I remain silent now, he will understand that this is allowed. If I scream, he will hang up. Sarah did something Julian did not expect. She applied radical pragmatism. She realized that her feelings were merely control levers for him. You know, Julian. She made a long, theatrical pause, evening out her breath. You are right. It really will be difficult for us. If your work schedule does not allow you to simply warn me about your disappearance, it means we are at different levels of understanding discipline. Let us take a break for an indefinite period. I need to focus on my projects. where everything is predictable. She did not listen to his answer. She pressed end call. Lesson number 2. Unpredictability is a tool of control. As soon as you show that you are ready to walk away forever in response to disrespect, the dopamine loop breaks. You mustn't play a game where the rules are changed right during the move. 5. Phase sensory immersion. Metaphorical description. Sarah's room was immersed in blue twilight, pierced only by the cold light of the screen. It was raining outside, and drops ran down the glass, resembling distorted faces. The smell of jasmine from the scented candle now seemed nauseatingly sweet, like the lies at the beginning of the relationship. Sarah placed the phone in a deep drawer of the chest. The sound of the closing drawer was dry and final, like the click of the handcuffs she had just removed from herself. She stood in silence, feeling how inside her, instead of panic, a heavy, lead-like but calm calculation was spreading. Chapter 3. The Architecture of False Vulnerability. Why your pity is his triumph won. Phase encounter. Narrative. The meeting room of the Apex Investment Fund resembled an aquarium. Glass walls, icy light, and complete isolation from external noise. Arthur sat at the head of the table, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. Before him lay documents that were supposed to finalize the takeover of a rival company. His opponent, Elena, entered late. She did not burst in. She literally oozed into the room. Her shoulders were slumped, her hair was slightly disheveled, and shadows lay under her eyes that even expensive concealer could not hide. When she sat down, her hands trembled noticeably, and she awkwardly bumped a glass of water. "Forgive me, Arthur," she whispered, pressing her palm to her temple. "A terrible week. I look broken so that you stop seeing me as a business shark." Arthur felt a strange discomfort. His plan for a lightning attack suddenly seemed to him too cruel. After all, he is not a monster. "Elena, if you are feeling unwell, we can reschedule." No, she interrupted him, raising eyes full of tears toward him. "Let us finish. It is just my board of directors, they are literally destroying me. If I do not bring them at least some concessions on this contract, I will be out on the street in a month, after 10 years of work. I am appealing to your humanity so that you forget about the profit of your company." She fell silent, convulsively clutching a wet napkin in her hands. A heavy, sticky pity hung in the room. Arthur looked at her and caught himself thinking that he was ready to reconsider the clause on percentages, just so this woman would stop suffering so much. 2. Phase psychological X-ray analysis. Let us look inside Arthur's skull. What is happening there? Elena is conducting a session of armed empathy, the victim trap mechanism. In social psychology, this is called using the victim archetype from the Karpman drama triangle. When someone demonstrates an extreme degree of weakness, a socially adapted person, Arthur, automatically activates the rescuer role. Neurochemistry. Looking at Elena's suffering, Arthur's brain begins to produce oxytocin. This hormone is responsible for attachment and trust. It is a natural tranquilizer. Under the influence of oxytocin, Arthur's analytical abilities decline. He stops seeing Elena as a competitor. He sees her as a wounded animal that needs help. Microsignals. Elena is a professional. Her trembling hands and disheveled hair are part of the costume. She creates cognitive dissonance. The image of a tough CEO does not fit with the image of a crying woman. Arthur's brain tries to resolve this conflict in the simplest way. She is just human. She is in pain. I should soften. This is not sincerity. This is demonstrative decompensation. She sheds her armor so that Arthur sheds his. 3. Phase psychological precedent. Real example. Let us recall the classic studies of Robert Cialdini and his principle of reciprocity. When a person makes a concession to us or trusts us with an intimate secret, we feel enormous biological pressure to respond in kind. In one of his experiments, Cialdini showed that people are much more likely to buy a product they do not need from a salesperson who first told them about a personal failure or a small weakness. We are programmed to pay for trust with trust. Elena gifts Arthur her vulnerability. She is saying, as it were, "Look, I trust you with my weakness. I am defenseless before you." And Arthur, obeying ancient social instincts, wants to repay her, not with words, but with the actual money of his company. 4. Phase counterstrike. The lesson. Arthur's internal monologue turned into chaos. She is a human being after all. Do not be a jerk. But the contract. He already reached for the pen to write in new conditions, but at the last moment, he stopped. He looked at Elena, not into her tearing eyes, but at her lips. At the moment when she thought he did not see, the corner of her mouth jerked upward for a fraction of a second. It was a micro-expression of triumph. The predator smelled blood. Arthur slowly removed his hands from the table. He straightened up, regaining his alpha status. "Elena, I deeply sympathize with your personal situation. It truly sounds terrible. I acknowledge your state, but I do not accept it as an argument." He paused, his voice becoming dry like sandpaper. "No, my board of directors did not hire me for charity. If you cannot continue the negotiations in a working state, we will reschedule them for a week. No, the terms of the contract will remain the same. Either we sign them now, or the deal is canceled." Elena's tears dried instantly. Her face froze, turning into a mask of cold porcelain. She realized the rescuer will not come. The game is over. Lesson number 3. Your empathy is a backdoor into your psyche. If you feel acute pity for a person who is in confrontation or negotiation with you, stop. You are being hacked. Pity for an enemy is a betrayal of oneself. 5. Phase sensory immersion. The room became very quiet, but it was no longer the sticky silence of sympathy, but the sterile silence of an operating room. Arthur felt the smell of metal from the paperclips on the table and the barely perceptible scent of Elena's expensive perfume, which now seemed to him like the smell of an ambush. The light of the lamps reflected in her glasses, hiding her eyes and turning them into 2 dead mirrors. He sat motionless, feeling the cold surface of the table under his palms, realizing, in this world, it is not the kindest who survives, but the one who knows how to distinguish a wound from a mask. Chapter 4. The illusion of authority and status pressure. How not to break under the weight of the uniform one. Phase encounter. Narrative. The interrogation room in the police department smelled of old tobacco, chlorine, and stale human fear. David sat on a hard metal chair bolted to the floor. The light from the single lamp was directed so that he could barely see the face of the person opposite him. But that person could see every movement of David's pupils. Detective Vance did not sit. He slowly walked around David in circles, like a shark narrowing its circles around its prey. Every step he took on the linoleum echoed in David's ears. Vance was massive. His jacket barely concealed his powerful shoulders, and the holster on his belt seemed like an integral part of his body. "Listen to me, David." Vance's voice was low, vibrating, piercing to the bone. "I have a folder on my desk. There is enough information in it to ensure you never see the sun again. I am creating an illusion of omnipotence. Vance suddenly stopped right behind David's back and leaned in so close that David could smell mint chewing gum and gun oil. But I am here to help you. If you speak now, I can negotiate with the prosecutor. If not, Vance paused, and his hand landed heavily on David's shoulder, squeezing it until it hurt. If not, I will crush you into powder. Do you understand whom you are playing with? David felt his breathing become short. His body wanted one thing: to shrink, to close his eyes, and to agree to everything just to make this pressure stop. His brain screamed, "He is the law. He is stronger. Submit." I feel like an insect under a microscope. My rights are just words, and his power is real. 2. Phase psychological X-ray. Analysis. Detective Vance is a master of status dominance. He uses several biological pressure levers at once. Violation of proxemics. He invades David's intimate zone, closer than 45 centimeters. This causes an immediate release of adrenaline and cortisol in the victim. The brain switches to survival mode. Sensory deprivation and overload. The blinding light and directed noise, his steps, create cognitive noise. It becomes difficult for David to logically analyze Vance's lies. The angry father archetype. Vance mimics the behavior of a dominant male in a primitive troop. His low vocal timbre and physical contact, the hand on the shoulder, are signals of an alpha individual. An ancient instinct for submission, left over from primate ancestors, is activated in David's brain. If the alpha is angry, one must admit guilt to avoid physical punishment. This is called neurobiological hijacking. Vance is not just talking, he is literally hacking David's body, forcing his chemistry to work against logic. 3. Phase psychological precedent. Real example. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram from Yale University conducted one of the darkest experiments in history. A subject, an ordinary person, was ordered to give electric shocks to another person for mistakes in tests. The victim, an actor, screamed, begged to stop, and simulated a heart attack. The subjects hesitated, sweated, and trembled. But when a man in a white coat, the authority, said in a calm voice, "The experiment requires that you continue," 65% of the participants went as far as the lethal voltage of 450 volts. They were not sadists. They were ordinary people who were paralyzed by the magic of the white coat. We tend to delegate our conscience and reason to anyone who looks like they have the right to command. Vance is Milgram's white coat, only instead of a coat, he has a badge. 4. Phase counterstrike. The lesson. David closed his eyes for 3 seconds. He remembered the base. Any authority is a social construct until you give it power over yourself. He applied the technique of desacralization. He mentally undressed Vance. He imagined how this formidable detective grumbles at overcooked toast in his underwear in the morning, how his back hurts, how he fears his superiors. Vance ceased to be the law. He became just a tired man in a sweaty jacket. David slowly moved his shoulder from under Vance's hand. He did not flinch. He simply shifted smoothly. "Detective," David's voice was quiet, but there was not a trace of vibration in it. "Your folder is empty. If you had anything at all, you would not be wasting time on this performance. You are shouting because you have no evidence. I am exposing your bluff. Your symbols do not work on me." David looked Vance straight in the eyes. Not with defiance, but with the icy curiosity of a researcher observing an insect. "I will wait for my lawyer. And please sit down. Your breath smells of cheap fast food. It is preventing me from concentrating." Vance froze. His entire image of a formidable predator crumbled. When the victim stops fearing the uniform turns into ordinary clothing. Lesson number 4. Your submission is a voluntary act. Any hierarchy is a hallucination that rests on your consent to play the role of a subordinate. As soon as you stop recognizing someone else's right to dominance, their power evaporates. 5. Phase sensory immersion. Metaphorical description. The interrogation room suddenly became very cold. The hum of the fluorescent lamp overhead now reminded David not of torture, but simply of a technical malfunction. He felt the rough, cold metal of the table under his fingers. This metal was real, while Vance's threats were not. The smell of tobacco no longer suffocated him. David felt himself inside a transparent ice cube, where Vance's emotions shattered against the facets without reaching the target. He was absolutely autonomous. In this dirty office, he was the only one who truly possessed the situation. Chapter 5. Radical Autonomy, the Philosophy of Power. How to become the one who defines reality 1. Phase Encounter. Narrative. The boardroom on the 60th floor of Titan Holdings was flooded with sunset light, which painted everything in a blood-red color. Leo stood at the panoramic window, his back to the long table of black marble. Behind him sat 12 people, the board of shareholders. On the table stood a carafe of water, and the slight vibration from the ventilation caused the surface of the water to tremble. It was the only unstable thing in the room. Leo, the voice of Mr. Thorne, the chairman of the board, cut through the silence like a scalpel. "We all recognize your merits, but your strategy is too risky. We have made a consolidated decision. You must resign as CEO. This is for the common good. We are using moral blackmail and the power of the majority to force you to surrender voluntarily." Leo did not turn around. He looked at the tiny cars below, which seemed like ants. There was no panic in his head. There was only cold calculation. "The common good," Leo repeated, tasting the words. An interesting formulation for a group of people who hate each other. He slowly turned around. His face was absolutely motionless. He did not seek support in the eyes of Miller or Wilson. He knew that Wilson had looked away because he had already promised Thorne his vote in exchange for the position of vice president. "I see your betrayals as lines of program code. You are predictable. You are suggesting that I submit to the will of the majority," Leo continued, approaching the table. His steps were noiseless. "But the majority is just a bunch of frightened units that have huddled into a pack because, individually, you are nothing." 2. Phase Psychological X-ray. Analysis. The board of shareholders is using the most powerful weapon, social ostracism and group pressure, groupthink. Attack mechanism. Thorne is trying to impose an objective reality on Leo, where Leo is an outcast and the board is the highest authority. This is an attempt to cause social death in the victim. For the human brain, exclusion from the group is equivalent to physical death. Neurochemistry. In such a situation, an ordinary person's anterior cingulate cortex, the zone responsible for physical pain, is activated. To be rejected is literally painful. Thorne expects that Leo will begin to defend himself, make excuses, or beg. Any of these actions will confirm the power of the board. Will to power. Leo applies Nietzsche's concept. He understands that the morality of the common good is a slave morality created to restrain the strong. He refuses to accept their value system. He is not a fireable employee. He is the owner of the situation. Leo analyzes them not as colleagues, but as biological objects with needs. Fear of losing money, thirst for power, sexual scandals. He deconstructs their unity. 3. Phase psychological precedent, real example. Let us recall the Stanford prison experiment by Philip Zimbardo, 1971. Ordinary students were divided into guards and prisoners. Within days, the guards began to show sadism, and the prisoners, pathological submissiveness. Why? Because they accepted the roles imposed on them by the environment. They believed that the basement walls were a real prison, and Zimbardo's rules were the truth. Leo is currently in such a basement. The shareholders are the guards who have come to believe in their power. But Leo knows the secret. The prison disappears as soon as you stop playing the role of the prisoner. If you do not recognize their rules, their handcuffs turn into cheap plastic. 4. Phase counterstrike. The lesson. Leo did not start to argue about strategy. He did not start to prove his correctness. He struck at the very foundation of their pack, at the personal egoism of each individual. He placed a thin folder on the table. Thorn, I know about your transactions through the Panamanian Fund. If I leave, these documents will be at the tax office in 15 minutes. Miller, your factory in Ohio is mortgaged against a loan that my bank bought yesterday. One word from me, and you are bankrupt. I am destroying your coalition by showing that the common good does not exist. There are only your selfish interests. Leo swept his gaze over them. The silence in the hall became deadly. Thorne turned pale, his Adam's apple jerked convulsively. Group pressure evaporated. Now they were just frightened people, each of whom thought only about how to save their own skin. Now, Leo sat at the head of the table, although it was not his place according to protocol. We will discuss my expansion plan, and you will vote for it unanimously. Not because it is good, but because I have decided so. Lesson number 5. Your reality is what you impose on others. Become the one who gives definitions. Do not ask permission to be strong. Power is not given. It is taken. As soon as you realize that all social rules are merely recommendations for the weak, you will become invulnerable. 5. Phase. Sensory immersion. Metaphorical description. The blood-red light of the sunset finally filled the room, turning the faces of the shareholders into frozen masks of red wax. Leo felt the coolness of the marble table under his fingertips. The smells of expensive perfume and fear mixed into a heavy, suffocating trail. He felt like a surgeon who had just opened an abscess and was now watching the poison flow out. The world outside the window, with its noise and chaos, no longer frightened him. He was above it. He was a point of absolute peace in the center of the storm. In his consciousness reigned a crystalline, icy silence. The silence of a man who has finally woken up. Conclusion: you are here. You have reached the end. Most drop out as early as the second chapter because their psyche cannot withstand the destruction of the familiar world, where good always wins, and people are fundamentally good. You, however, preferred the scalpel of truth to the anesthesia of illusions. Now look in the mirror. Do you see the same person as yesterday? That is an error. Now you are a biological object that has realized its algorithms. You are no longer a resource. You are a predator who has learned to see the strings by which the puppets are pulled. The world has not changed. It is still as cruel, chaotic, and full of social parasites. But your interface of interaction with it has changed. You no longer react. You analyze. You do not feel guilt. You see manipulation. You do not submit to status. You deconstruct it. To consolidate this foundation, I have gathered for you a brief summary of your new operating system. The main rule: no one can manage you until you agree to play by someone else's rules. The entire social mechanics rest on your fear of being bad, uncomfortable, or exiled. As soon as you accept the possibility of being anything, cruel, cold, lonely, you become unreachable. Your autonomy is your armor. Phase sensory conclusion. Imagine that you are standing at the top of a huge glass skyscraper. Below is the city pulsing with millions of lights. You hear only the hum of the wind and your own calm breathing. The smell of cold ozone fills your lungs. You no longer need to shout to be heard. You do not need to run to be on time. This entire world is simply a set of data on your screen. You press a key and the picture changes. You are calm. You are composed. You are the sole master of your reality. Your training is finished. Now you are ready for practice. Knowledge of the mechanisms of the psyche is your primary freedom. Subscribe to explore the hidden facets of human behavior together. And be sure to write in the comments which psychological pattern or strategy we should analyze next time. Let us seek the truth together.